So here at the Monterey Institute, we feel it is vital for our study abroad programs to contain elements of intercultural competency training. In a perfect world, this training would occur throughout the life of the program, starting with several periods of on-campus training, continuing while they are abroad, and then leading into post-program personal development and advice for future students. For a program that starts in the spring term, this is doable. It might look something like this. Then we start with our in-campus training, development begins, we supplement that training further. While on their program, they're participating in unique opportunities for personal growth, and by the time that the student returns, they've started to develop a better sense of what it means to work in intercultural settings. Unfortunately, the fall term is another story. The problem with a fall study abroad program is the access the study abroad office will have to the student prior to their departure. Unlike programs in the spring, where the student can be prepared throughout the fall and winter, any international program that begins in the fall is preceded by the lengthy summer break, where the student is not only away from the campus, but they're also likely in a non-academic study state of mind. As a result, a student's hope of developing intercultural competency might look a little more like this, where they have their on-campus preparation, but then they have a large summer break, they go on their program, and by the time they've returned from the program, we don't really know what sort of competency they've developed or the things that they've experienced. So the question becomes not what intercultural competency learning goals we have for our students, but how we can deliver the training to them in order to achieve those goals, given the complication of the summer break. What follows is a three-part pilot program that we've developed in order to answer some of these questions. We hope that you'll find the information useful and you might consider using it at your own institution.
Now I'm going to present to you the first phase of our intercultural training workshop that will take place prior to a student's departure. Before getting into the details of the first phase of our intercultural training workshop, I'd like to define intercultural competence. This definition is from Dr. Fantini of the School for International Training, SIT. The complex of abilities needed to perform effectively and appropriately when interacting with others who are linguistically and culturally different from oneself. So we're going to rely on this definition going forward in the intercultural training. So to take a look here, first, why is it important to have ICC training, intercultural competence training, in study abroad? Well, for one, it is currently best practice for institutions to provide students with a pre-departure orientation to address practical issues such as visas, housing, course registration, among other topics. However, more institutions are recognizing the need for intercultural training as an integral part of the study abroad experience. This is the result of increased research measuring the impact of such trainings, data demonstrating the impact of study abroad duration paired with recent study abroad trends. Portillo's 2004 study observed student outcomes using the IDI, Intercultural Development Inventory measurement tool, which is often used among experts in the field. She found that students studying for longer periods of time achieved greater intercultural sensitivity. According to the IIE, the Institute for International Education Open Doors Report of 2013, 58.9% of students in 2011 and 2012 studied for short-term programs. This means summer or 8 weeks or less. So those two paired together, with the increase in students studying for shorter periods of time, institutions are beginning to recognize the need for ICC training as a part of their study abroad programs in order to meet their mission and goals of universities that claim the importance of token words such as global citizenship, cross-cultural competence, global awareness, these sort of token words. This web that you see here is a representation of a training workshop as developed by Fowler and Mumford in the Intercultural Sourcebook, which is for a training model for intercultural competency training. The trainer here is at the center and controls many of the elements, serving as a bridge between two cultures, the host and the home culture. They will rely on methods, content, resources, and design to facilitate the workshop as detailed in the Intercultural Sourcebooks, Volumes 1 and 2. This is a great resource for institutions beginning an ICC training for the first time. Before getting into the details of Phase 1, I'd like to look at some examples from the field, some universities to look out for who have made great progress for their students and for the field. These two specifically are Wake Forest University and the University of the Pacific. Wake Forest developed an ICC training model for their professors in order to enable them to better teach ICC theories and facilitate workshops for their students. This is called the Workshop for Intercultural Skills Enhancement, or WISE. The program was so successful that it was turned into an annual conference, the WISE Conference, held in Winston-Salem. At the 2014 WISE Conference, representatives from the University of the Pacific presented on facilitating intercultural competence, their model for home campus faculty prior to and after study abroad. Their model, similar to ours that we are presenting to you today, includes a pre-departure orientation course, followed by the student's period of study abroad, and ends with a re-entry seminar. Susan Sample conducted a survey of the University of the Pacific students in 2010, measuring their growth using the same IDI measurement tool I spoke to you about earlier. She compared the pre- and post-IDI assessment scores for students, and she found that the IDI scores were raised by 19.78 points, which is both a significant change for these students and is significantly different from university students who have not been a part of the international curriculum or have not studied abroad. So this is some very important research and data that has supported the need for increased ICC training. The first phase of the workshop's learning outcomes will be based off of Darla Deerdorf's Intercultural Competence Model and Pyramid. We see here the desired external and internal outcomes for students, as well as skills, knowledge, and comprehension, and requisite attitudes that students should have by the end of their intercultural competence training and the end of their period of studying abroad. The first phase in particular will focus on openness and curiosity, observation and listening skills, and self-awareness, as it will likely be their first exposure to an ICC training. So let's get into Phase 1, the pre-departure training. This one-day mandatory workshop would take place on the home campus in the semester prior to the student's departure. In this case, the workshop would take place in the spring semester for a fall departure. The facilitator, especially in the first year of the workshop, would ideally be a professional trained in intercultural training or intercultural competence. Experimentation is encouraged for the facilitator of this workshop, as they must test which activities are appropriate for them and their institutional setting, as well as their students. If the program has run for 1 year or more, then the facilitator is encouraged to invite returning study abroad students to participate in the workshop, having both pre- and post students side by side to enhance learning. As we will discuss later, their participation could also be a requirement as a part of their re-entry study abroad program. Otherwise, the facilitator may invite international students or professors or experts in the field of international studies, intercultural studies, etc. The important thing here is for the facilitator to draw on the expertise that already exists on their home campus, on resources that they may already have. So the first step of the Phase 1 of the workshop is to give students a theoretical framework to understanding culture, intercultural competency development, and culture shock, to name a few important theories. You have the examples here. These are some of the most important, most vital to include in the workshop. First of all, culture is often described as an iceberg. This is an easy and an approachable way to introducing culture that the facilitator may want to use. Next, one of the most influential studies in ICC was conducted by Gert Hofstede. The facilitator may assign reading on the theories and dimensions as presented by Hofstede prior to the workshop. The Hofstede Center website is a great resource and very approachable for beginning ICC theories. The students will explore the cultural dimensions presented by Hofstede, and this will begin their reflection process as well. The facilitator will hold discussions around the different dimensions, such as the power distance index, for example, asking students to provide examples from their personal experiences and discuss the effect of power in certain situations. This is just one example, and this can be done for all of the different dimensions presented by Hofstede. Bennett's model of intercultural sensitivity, as shown here, is also vital to explore with students to map out the journey they will be taking towards higher levels of intercultural sensitivity. As research shows, many students are within the 3 ethnocentric phases prior to study abroad. It is important to discuss with them the development across phases that will happen during their time abroad and during their further ICC trainings. All students will also most likely experience some form of culture shock or culture discomfort, as we might say, during their time abroad. The culture shock U-curve model demonstrates to them that this is a normal psychological process that people go through when living in a different culture. This model provides them with the foundations to better understanding their emotional changes while abroad. So to begin the reflection process after the students have a theoretical foundation and background in ICC, we want to move them towards the learning outcomes of self-awareness through reflection. The students will begin by introducing themselves on the morning of the workshop and giving a brief explanation of their motivations for going on this program. They would answer, "Why are you participating in this program? Please share one thing you're excited about and one thing you are most afraid of." Having students share their motivations and fears as they pertain to study abroad will bond the class and will also provide the facilitator with a better understanding of the participants. This will also force students to truly reflect on their deeper reasoning for participating in this particular study abroad program, or study abroad in general. Reflection will take place throughout the day in the form of debriefing. After each activity, the facilitator should debrief. Ask the students to share their ideas, opinions, and feelings about the exercise and what they've learned from it. The purpose of the reflection process is for the students to better understand themselves and also their home culture, which is something they will explore further in phase 2 of the ICC training. Depending on the chosen length of the workshop, the facilitator may consider beginning an introduction to the host culture, which will be explored further in phases 2 and 3 of the ICC training. Here are a few examples and resources facilitators may use to introduce the host culture. For one, the Hofstede Center, which I discussed earlier, provides cultural dimensions organized by country that the students may explore. The Country Navigator online tool serves a pretty similar purpose and also includes a survey that students may take to find their cultural profile. And again, as I discussed earlier, it's important to take advantage of the resources and the people on the home campus. So they may also invite international students and returning students that can speak to the host culture. Exercises are the heart of the ICC training, especially in this first phase. It is important to keep the students engaged during the entire workshop and facilitate hands-on experiential learning. Fowler describes what is a small group exercise. So it's a focused activity. Both content and process are considered, and synergistic results are intended. So it's important to keep this in mind as I go through the next few activities. There are hundreds of exercises that facilitators can access through resources such as the NAFSA Resource Library that you may find easily online. The activities for the pre-departure workshops have the goal of taking students outside of their comfort zone and forcing them to reflect on cultural differences and similarities. They will also encourage reflection and inward looking and increased self-awareness. This first activity, speed friending, or similar to speed dating, is a great icebreaker for students at the beginning of the workshop. This would be particularly successful if international students were participating in the activity as well. As a part of the debrief, the facilitator will discuss the struggles of making personal connections with people in another culture in a short period of time. This is often a nerve-wracking and frightening feat for students as they go abroad. So this is a good introduction. This next activity comes from the faculty of the University of Tel Aviv in Georgia. Its aim is to demonstrate that one's feelings of attachment to a given culture are learned in the process of socialization, and that people judge other cultures based on their own cultural perspective, as reported by its creators. The students will be divided into 3 groups. The majority of the students will be assigned A culture or B culture. 3 to 5 students, depending on the size of the group, will be neutral observers throughout this activity. The A and B cultures are very different. They have certain traits that other cultures might find bizarre, and they have certain dislike for cultural traits found in other cultures. The facilitator may decide these details, but they should pertain to certain cultural categories, such as eye contact, touching, personal space, volume, gestures, etc., because students will often encounter difficulty with these differences in their host culture when they arrive. Students from A and B culture will be asked to interact for about 10 minutes, making sure that each student has spoken to all individuals from the other culture. They will be asked to observe and to listen to pick up on social and cultural cues. The observers will watch and take notes on the interactions. The debrief is key for this activity. Students will begin discussing and developing skills in observation, tolerance, and curiosity. So to summarize the first phase, the pre-departure training, this is what it looks like. The phase 1 aims to start students on the path towards achieving Deardorff's learning outcomes objectives that I discussed earlier. Beginning with cultural theory foundations, self-awareness through reflection, and participation in group activities, then students will develop curiosity and observation skills through experiential learning. And this is what phase 1 looks like. If you would like more details on the first phase of the ICC training, then please refer to our paper for more information.
For the second part of our program, I will take you through the summer period prior to the student's departure. As noted earlier, this can be a difficult time to train students because they're not only away from campus, but they're maybe not in the right state of mind. So to combat this, I'm going to present 3 different modules that you could assign to your students at various points of the summer. Each model contains 2 different components. One is a reflection assignment to sort of build upon the ideas that have been introduced in the on-campus training that Keri was talking about. And the other is a documentation assignment. And this is sort of also similar to the on-campus training, that it is about getting students out of their comfort zone. The reflections are intended to get the student thinking critically about their home culture, and the documentation pieces are meant to actually get them out into it. This model also means that the assignments can't be done the night before, and it will require some active participation among the students. And you can't share answers because each will be unique to each student. I just should note that this is not an exhaustive list of activities by any means. It's just a starting block. And furthermore, you'll need to decide for yourself how you're going to enforce the completion of these assignments. But I'll try and give one suggestion here at the end of the presentation. The first activity is intended to get students thinking about time. Many parts of the United States have a strict understanding of time, but this interpretation is not something that's shared by the rest of the world, and in fact it can vary considerably within different parts of the United States. So for this first documentation exercise, we want students to get out into the area that they're staying in for their summer and capture 4 photographs. First, we want them to find a place where people routinely wait for roughly 5 minutes. They understand and accept that in order for blank to happen, they're going to have to wait at least 5 minutes. Second, the student needs to find something where people will need to wait at least 20 minutes. And third, we will increase this even further to having the student find an instance where people know and accept that they're going to have to wait for at least an hour for something to happen. And finally, for the sake of contrast, in the 4th photograph, we would like the student to find an example where if someone has to wait at all, they will not only be displeased, but they will start to actively protest the fact that they have to wait. The reflection assignment for this first module is inspired by Hofstede's analysis of different cultural values that Katie was talking about in the first part of the presentation. For this assignment, we will give the student a table with a host of different cultural values. We will then ask them to rank these values in their order of importance. First, we will have the students rank their personal feelings. Then we will have them rank how they feel that their home culture values them or views them. Third, we will ask them to rank in order of importance what they expect their host culture views them. And then finally, once they're actually on the program, this could form the basis of an activity while in country, what they actually find out the host really does believe. Module number 2 is designed to get students thinking about the more obscure parts of culture. Now, we've already introduced this in the first part of the training while they were on campus with the iceberg model that Katie was speaking about earlier. This documentation exercise is intended to get students looking at the parts of American culture that are so ingrained that we don't realize that they require a lot of cultural background to understand. The student is required to go out into their summer community and photograph at least 5 different sayings or idioms that express American culture. Each saying should represent a different category. And these categories are self-determination, privacy, assertiveness, individualism, and exclusivity. If possible, we suggest you encourage the students to find contrasting examples within each category. For example, a man's home is his castle, and mi casa, su casa, are both used in our modern American expressions, and they're both concerned with the idea of privacy. However, they convey very different ideas, very different messages. For the reflection part of module number 2, we want the students to start thinking about nonverbal communication, nonverbal expression, and how prevalent it actually is in everyday life. Once again, we'll give them a chart with a host of different cues listed. And for each one, we want the students to find a way that their home culture uses that cue to express something that they like. And then we want them to find a way that they use the same cue to express something that they dislike. As with previous examples, this same exercise could be repeated and contrasted once the student is living in the host community. It could form the basis of any of the on-site activities that Keri will talk about shortly, their communication papers, reflection logs, etc. In our final module, we want the student to look at rhythm and motivation. Perhaps one of the hardest things to notice without prompting is how things can flow from one state to another. For this last documentation exercise, the student will be given a table, and it will have a series of terms that appear to be in opposition to one another. Their assignment is to take a photograph of both terms in the same context. For example, in an office, there is an informal atmosphere around the water cooler or the employee lounge. However, when employees transition to the boardroom, suddenly there becomes a very formal atmosphere. So this is the sort of thing we want the student to identify, these kind of movements from one state to another. It should be noted that a creative student might be sending examples that contain both descriptions. For example, a music concert or something as simple as a light bulb can be either on or off, but it can't be both at the same time. The final reflection activity here in module number 3 is to reinforce the idea of motivation for the student, motivation behind behaviors. So the student will be given a large list of activities. and they will be asked to choose just one. They will then explain who performs the activity, what they do, where it takes place, when it takes place, why the person is doing it, and then simply how are they doing it. For example, let's choose the one that's a good example to give, because otherwise every student will choose it: studying. So who is studying? In this case, it's quite simple. The student is studying. What are they studying? Perhaps it's books, notes, lab reports. Could be videos, could be they're reviewing past assignments. Where are they studying? Libraries, dorms, in their house, classroom, outdoors. Could be very different. When are they studying? What time of day? For how long? These sort of things. Why are they studying? Perhaps it's to get good grades. Maybe it's because they want to get a job. Maybe it's because it's what's expected of them by authority figures, parents, etc. And finally, how are they studying? Simple things. Is it in a desk? Is it in a chair? Is it in bed? Do they study while they're on their phone, with the radio on? There's a lot of different possibilities. The strength of this idea, or the strength of this reflection module, is it will form a basis that the student can refer back to while in the host culture, while they're trying to do some of the additional activities that Keri will talk about shortly. It develops a baseline, and they will be able to refer back to it in order to pick up on the differences and then use those to comment. For an in-depth look at the dissemination of these programs, you can read the supplemental report that we've prepared to accompany this presentation. But here at the end of my time, I was asked to just speak briefly about one solution you might have available to you if your institution already has the enrollment management software, Teradata. This was also possible with other platforms. This is just the one I'll be talking about. The strength of this piece of software is that it will allow your students to submit all of their activities online, as well as track that they have completed it. For the other two phases, this isn't too much of an issue because you will have either a facilitator or a program coordinator who is with the students. But here in the summer program, it's quite difficult because students are spread out and you don't have access to them. So these sort of programs can really streamline the submission and gathering of student information. The strength of it is that it's individual for each student, and you can customize it so that you know who's completed their assignments and who hasn't. You can send reminders to those who have not to keep the ball rolling. The three things that I'm going to talk about right here at the end, the three features that are prevalent to working with the summer training, is the first of which is called their learning content section. Here's where you can put assignment instructions, and in each part the student verifies that they have received the information, understood it, and are moving forward. So you actually get sort of a signed off, yes, I understand. The second prevalent section is what they have created an assessment part. Originally this was designed as a quiz tool. And although it doesn't feature a lot with the modules that I've discussed here today, it is a section where the administrators can create evaluation materials that will assess whether or not the student is actually developing proper competency, judged by how the administration feels fit. The final component is the journal section, and this is quite prevalent actually for the summer training program, because this is where students can upload their contributions. For the preceding modules, this is where students would post their photographs or their reflection pieces, and all of the administrators of the program would be able to see it. By using this or similar software, you can keep all of the summer ICC training in one place. And because the system is monitoring student participation, you don't need to worry about sending follow-up emails or trying to figure out who is at what stage. The software is keeping it is keeping the log for you. That concludes my part of our presentation, and hopefully this brief look has given you a few ideas of a way you could incorporate an ICC training program into your summer break. And now we'll continue on with training for during the program and then after the program is concluded with Keri.
Hi, my name is Keri Toma, and I will be presenting to you today about the on-site and re-entry phase of our intercultural competency training. So if you'll recall, we have a pre-departure training in the spring, a summer maintenance program, and I will be focusing on the on-site training during the actual study abroad and also touch upon the re-entry training once they've returned to the States. So, why do we need ICC training in study abroad? With globalization, higher education institutions have come to realize that we are also responsible for preparing global citizens and having our students ready to participate in a global marketplace. This includes working with and in other cultures, hence the need to facilitate intercultural competency. However, as Deerdorf notes, unfortunately, interculturally competent global citizens generally do not occur naturally. So this means that we can't take a student, place them in a foreign country, and expect them to be interculturally competent simply because they are in a different culture, that we have to do something to facilitate that intercultural competence. And along those lines, here's another quote. The assumption was that contact with difference will automatically lead to intercultural competence, which we know is not true. Students won't become interculturally competent simply by being in a different culture, which is why we've created this program to help facilitate that development. So as Katie mentioned earlier, this is Deerdorf's pyramid model of intercultural competence upon which we have built our program. And again, just to recap, I see the requisite attitudes of respect, openness, curiosity, and then beginning to have the knowledge, comprehension, and skills as part of the first phase of the program, which Katie explained to you earlier. And this has to do with preparedness. Darla Deerdorf talks about how essential it is for students to help students prepare to become interculturally competent students. This means giving them the language to talk about intercultural competency, as Katie was talking about the theories, the various theories that they can use to, first of all, understand cultural general knowledge, which will help them better understand their own culture, which is essential to getting them to understand another culture as well. So we need to understand our own culture in order to understand someone else's. So with that basis of preparedness, my focus in this phase is the on-site application with intentional facilitation. And by intentional facilitation, what we need is a well-trained cultural mentor, someone who can help guide the students through this process. They've already started it in their home country. Now they're on site, and we need to still continue to help them along this path. Other scholars have also noted the importance of this facilitation. Vandenberg and Page talk about how ICC is facilitated by appropriate intervention. Deerdorf also talks about the importance of integrated assignments throughout the study abroad experience to form a targeted intervention, targeted facilitation. So how I see the intentional facilitation, possible activities that we could do while on study abroad by perhaps meeting once a week to do these types of facilitated activities would be the cultural encounter log, a communication paper, student interviews, and guided reflection. And I will go over each of these briefly. So let's start with the cultural encounter log. So the idea here is for students to keep an ongoing log of any type of cultural or linguistic encounter that they might come across, whether that be not knowing what to do in a certain situation or not being able to get their message across in the way that they had hoped, and to record what happened and how they felt about that incident. What was their reaction to that encounter? And this is just a way to keep track of different cultural encounters that they come across, which will be further developed during the reentry phase and turned into a critical incident, which I will discuss a little later on. So related to the cultural encounter log is an activity developed by Keri, which she called a communication paper. In this study, what she did was she had native Japanese speakers who were studying culture work with foreign exchange students, and they talked about various communication strategies and had to work on a project in mixed groups, small groups. So each group, at the end of each group discussion, had to write a postcard-sized communication paper, just documenting any communication strategies that they might have used or differences that they noticed in communication with someone from the other culture. The key to this is to raise awareness as to what other communication strategies might be and what any other cultural encounters that might have come up during the group interaction, to come up with possible solutions to those situations, and then facilitate a deeper mutual understanding. Ultimately, this is the goal, is to come to a deeper understanding about why someone from that culture may have communicated in this way or behaved in this way. Another activity would be student interviews. This would serve as individualized advising time, and it can also provide the advisor or the mentor with some assessment of that student's ICC learning or development. And it's also an opportune time to help that student, if they're not progressing along the ways that you would like to, perhaps give them challenges or question them to think about different things, view things from other perspectives to help them along this path to ICC development. And in continuation from their pre-departure orientation, they would also continue to do guided reflection, focusing on a particular aspect and working on that self-awareness. So for example, continuing to look at the similarities and differences between the two cultures, but delving deeper, getting away from stereotypes and looking at what's beneath that. Why are we similar? Why are we different? Why do we behave in certain ways? And this will just give them a chance to really reflect on the experience and an opportunity to respond to encounters that they've come across. So again, that's our on-site training, and now I'd like to turn to the re-entry portion. So upon re-entry, students will continue the reflection process through a series of activities. And we'll just go over these briefly. The first one would be turning the cultural encounter log into a critical incident, working on a final reflection paper, and then continuing with student interviews and possibly assisting with pre-departure orientation. So the critical incident. What we're doing here is we're refining the cultural encounters. So students might select from their cultural encounter log that they kept during the actual study abroad, 1 or 2 encounters that they could develop into larger critical incidents. So they would select an encounter that happened, come up with possible, describe the situation, and then come up with possible solutions to that situation. Now, there might not be a correct answer, so they would choose what they thought would be the best response, perhaps research it, look into the cultural aspects of why this would be the best response, and then discuss that. And what we could do is we could then take these critical incidents, which were developed from all our students' cultural encounter logs, and compile them into a critical incident booklet that we could use for future orientations, that the students could use during the pre-orientations to talk about things that might occur while they're abroad. The final reflection paper would also be an opportunity for them to think about whether or not their ideas on culture have changed any from the beginning, prior to departure, through the entire experience, and now that they've come home and had some chance to reflect, how do they feel about the overall situation, and how these similarities and differences might impact their own actions. So, did they change at all during this experience? If so, how and why? In what ways have they changed? And then the final portion would be continuing with our student interviews, continuing with the coaching, the mentoring, and possibly assisting with the pre-departure orientation, coming full circle. So just to recap on this last phase, we need to prepare global citizens. Therefore, we need to incorporate intercultural competency into our study abroad programs. Global citizens don't occur naturally, so this has to be facilitated. We must help students along this path to developing intercultural competency, because immersion or just being in another culture is not sufficient. So that's why we came up with this idea for study abroad with an ICC component with intentional facilitation. And just to recap, our different phases: pre-departure, re-entry phase in the spring, summer maintenance section, and then fall on-site training, coming full circle back to our home country, re-entry ICC training. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, we would be happy to answer them at this point.